Imagine this. You're sitting in a room with someone you know, maybe a friend, a partner, a colleague. They haven't done anything particularly cruel. They aren't overtly demanding, aggressive, or hostile. And yet, after spending an hour with them, you feel utterly depleted. Your chest feels heavy. Your mind is fogged. Your body wants to curl in on itself and hide. You leave the encounter asking yourself, what is wrong with me? But what if the question is not about you at all? What if it's about something invisible happening between you, something unconscious, something ancient, something that even your rational mind can't fully grasp? Carl Jung believed that we are connected to each other through invisible psychic forces, that our minds are not isolated units, but part of a vast interwoven network of projections, complexes, and archetypes. And when someone drains your energy, Jung would argue, it is rarely about the surface interaction. It is about what is being exchanged beneath that surface psychically, emotionally, symbolically. But here is the unsettling paradox. The very people who drain you the most are often the ones you feel most responsible for, the ones you care for deeply, the ones you can't say no to, the ones you feel bound to, obligated to, entangled with. Why? Because the act of being drained is not always about exploitation. Sometimes it's about unconscious identification. Sometimes you lose your energy not because someone took it, but because you gave it, compulsively, reflexively, without knowing why. And this is where it gets darker. Jung warned about the phenomenon of psychic vampirism, not in the mystical, supernatural sense, but in the everyday exchanges of energy that happen when boundaries collapse, when projections run wild, when one person unconsciously feeds off another's life force. He called it the enmeshment of complexes, when your unconscious wounds link with theirs, creating an invisible tether that pulls your energy out of you and into them. But how does this happen? And more importantly, why does it keep happening with certain people, over and over again, while with others you feel energized, alive, whole? Is it about their personality, your weakness, some inevitable mismatch? Or is it something far more profound, a confrontation with the hidden dynamics of your psyche, the patterns of your childhood, the archetypes that shape your very sense of self? Maybe it's not just about energy. Maybe it's about identity. Maybe you're not just being drained, you're being dismantled, quietly, systematically, by forces you haven't yet named. And maybe the most dangerous part is this. You've been taught to tolerate it, to explain it away, to call it empathy, or love, or duty. You've been trained to betray your own exhaustion in the name of being a good friend, partner, child, or worker. But what if this exhaustion is not a sign of your weakness, but a signal of something vital? What if your depleted energy is not a flaw, but a message? And what if ignoring it means not only staying trapped in draining relationships, but remaining forever disconnected from your own core vitality, your own authentic self? Carl Jung didn't see these dynamics as mere social inconveniences. He saw them as spiritual emergencies, moments when the psyche is crying out to be heard, healed, and reclaimed. So ask yourself, why do I feel so drained around certain people? What part of me is giving away my energy, and why? Is this exhaustion my responsibility or theirs? And most disturbingly, what am I afraid would happen if I stopped letting them take from me? You see, the act of being drained is not passive. It is not accidental. It is part of a much larger, much more intricate psychological dance, one that Jung believed shapes the very fabric of our interpersonal lives. But to see it, to understand it, to break free from it, you have to go deeper than conventional explanations of toxic people or bad vibes. You have to descend into the architecture of the psyche itself, because only there, in the subterranean world of complexes, projections, and archetypes, will you find the real answer to why some people drain your energy and what that says about who you are, what you've lost, and what you're still searching for. Let's go there now. Let's uncover the hidden psychological and philosophical roots of this phenomenon, and why, until you see it clearly, it will keep controlling you from the shadows. To understand why certain people drain your energy, you have to first confront a deeply unsettling truth. Human relationships are rarely as conscious as we like to believe. Carl Jung argued that most of what happens between two people occurs not at the level of deliberate choice or rational thought, but in the unseen corridors of the unconscious. We are drawn to, repelled by, and profoundly impacted by others, not solely because of their personalities or behaviors, but because of the unconscious archetypes and complexes they activate within us. And here lies the hidden problem. Energy doesn't simply get taken from you. It gets unconsciously given away. But why would you give away your energy to someone who leaves you feeling drained, exhausted, or even broken? The answer begins with the psychological mechanism Jung called projection. Projection, the invisible puppet strings projection, is the act of unconsciously displacing parts of your own psych desires, fears, wounds, potentials onto another person. You see in them what you cannot or will not see in yourself. This is not optional. It is a universal human function. As Jung famously wrote, projection changes the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. When you interact with someone, your psyche is not neutral. It is actively, often desperately, seeking to find or avoid aspects of yourself in them. So, when someone drains your energy, it is often because they have become the carrier of a part of you that you have lost contact with. They might represent a vulnerability you never learned to protect, a wound you never dared to heal, a need for validation you refused to admit, or, paradoxically, a power you have disowned. Without realizing it, you may project onto them the responsibility to fulfill your unmet needs, or, conversely, to absorb your unexpressed aggression, resentment, or pain. Both of these dynamics are energetically exhausting, but it gets even more complicated because they are doing the same thing to you. The complex meets the complex. Jung described how complex is emotionally charged, often repressed parts of the psyche are not just internal. They have a magnetic quality. They attract others with complementary or reciprocal complexes. In other words, your wound seeks their wound. If you struggle with abandonment, you may be drawn to someone who unconsciously reinforces that fear. If you carry a savior complex, you may attract someone who needs to be rescued. If you repress your anger, you may find yourself entangled with someone who expresses theirs in passive or aggressive ways, forcing you to absorb it. These encounters are not random. They are the psyche's attempt to externalize inner conflicts so that you might finally see them. But when you are unconscious of this dynamic, you mistake the relationship for fate, when it is really a projection. And as these complexes entangle, energy begins to leak not just emotionally, but psychically. You feel drained because you are caught in a web that neither of you can fully see. The archetypal dimension at an even deeper level. These draining interactions are often governed by archetypes, universal symbols or patterns that shape human behavior across cultures and time. You may not realize it, but you might be enacting the archetype of the martyr endlessly sacrificing your needs to maintain peace, the rescuer pouring out energy to save someone who refuses to be saved, the orphan seeking nurturing from someone emotionally unavailable, the trickster playing the role of the one who must fix a broken person to earn love. These archetypal roles are ancient, powerful, and largely unconscious. They generate enormous psychic tension because they demand that you suppress your authenticity in order to maintain the role. And suppression is energetically expensive. You leave the interaction feeling drained because you've spent the entire time performing a role rather than being yourself. The irony is that both you and the other person may be completely unaware of the archetypal drama you are enacting. You simply know that, after being with them, you feel less, Existential dependencies. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre spoke about how the look of the other can strip us of our freedom, how being seen by someone else can reduce us to an object in their world. Jung expanded this to suggest that, in relationships where unconscious projections dominate, the other person doesn't just see us inaccurately. They pull us into a role that may drain our very vitality. When someone projects onto you their unmet needs, their inner wounds, or their own disowned shadow, you may feel responsible for carrying that psychic load. And if you have been conditioned by family, culture, or early trauma to accept that role, you will. You will give them your energy because you feel you must. And they will take it, often without even knowing they're doing so. Thus, the cycle of exhaustion continues. The cultural reinforcement of self-sacrifice. Adding another layer of complexity is the cultural glorification of self-sacrifice and emotional labor. From religious teachings to societal norms, we are often taught that giving endlessly to others, regardless of personal cost, is a moral good. Particularly for women, but increasingly for men as well, there is an unspoken expectation that empathy must have no boundaries. But Jung warned that the unchecked giving of energy without reflection, without boundaries, leads not to virtue, but to neurosis. In his words, the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. That is, the chronic pattern of individuals sacrificing their true selves for the emotional needs of others, perpetuating cycles of unconscious suffering. You may feel drained by certain people because you were never taught that it is permissible to protect your energy. You were taught that to do so is selfish, cold, or unkind. But is it? Or is it necessary? The hidden fear. What if I say no? At the root of this pattern often lies a fear. If I stop giving my energy to this person, they will leave me, reject me, or collapse. And perhaps even more terrifying, I will have to confront what part of me needed to keep giving in the first place. This is the existential crux of Jung's insight. Being drained by others is not just about their neediness. It is about your own unconscious participation in a dance of mutual avoidance, where both parties collude to keep certain truths hidden. So ask yourself, who in your life consistently drains you? What role do you play in that dynamic? What archetype might you be unconsciously enacting? And what fear keeps you from stepping out of it? Because until you see this clearly, you will keep giving away your energy in the hope of something that cannot be given, your own missing self. But what happens when you don't address this hidden problem? What are the unseen consequences of staying trapped in these draining relationships, allowing your energy to be siphoned off without consent or awareness? Let's go there now to the silent, but devastating impact of living disconnected from your energetic integrity. There is a peculiar kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot cure. You know this fatigue. It is the ache that settles into your bones after yet another conversation where you gave too much, listened too long, or carried someone else's emotional weight while your own needs went unspoken. It's not just tiredness, it's depletion, a draining of your very essence. Carl Jung warned that when we remain unconscious of how our psychic energy is being siphoned, we don't just risk temporary exhaustion, we risk a fundamental fragmentation of the self. Because every time you unconsciously hand over your energy in these relational dynamics, you are not simply helping or being kind. You are engaging in an act of quiet self-betrayal. And over time, these betrayals accumulate, forming a hidden architecture of self-abandonment that governs how you relate to others and to yourself. But the consequences don't stop at exhaustion. They begin to ripple outward, subtly but powerfully, shaping every aspect of your emotional, relational, and even physical life. The erosion of boundaries. When you consistently allow yourself to be drained by others, your boundaries begin to erode, not because you consciously choose to abandon them, but because the very concept of boundaries becomes synonymous with guilt, shame, or rejection. You find yourself saying yes when you mean no, listening when you need to be heard, comforting when you need to be comforted. And after a while, you no longer know where you end and the other begins. Jung referred to this as the loss of individuation, when your personal identity dissolves into the needs, desires, and projections of others. Instead of becoming the fully integrated self that Jung saw as the highest goal of life, you become a relational chameleon, adapting to the energy around you, but never anchoring in your own. This loss is not immediately visible. You may still function, still work, still smile, but inside you feel increasingly hollow, like an actor who has been playing the same role for so long that they've forgotten their own name. Chronic emotional fatigue. Unconscious energy leakage doesn't just erode boundaries, it creates chronic emotional fatigue. Your nervous system, designed to protect and regulate your emotional energy, becomes overstimulated. You may experience heightened anxiety, especially before or after interactions with draining individuals. Difficulty concentrating, as your mind is preoccupied with managing others' emotions. A pervasive sense of overwhelm, even with simple tasks. Emotional numbness, as a defense against constant psychic depletion. This fatigue is insidious because it's easily misattributed. You might blame your job, your diet, your sleep habits. Rarely do we recognize that it's the unseen relational patterns, the silent agreements to give too much, that are slowly eroding our vitality. But Jung did. He understood that unresolved psychic entanglements create what he called complex-induced fatigue, a form of soul-level exhaustion caused by the constant activation of unhealed psychological wounds in relational contexts. Distorted relationship patterns. Perhaps the most painful consequence of allowing yourself to be drained is that you begin to seek out or unconsciously tolerate relationships that continue the cycle. Why? Because what is familiar feels safe, even when it's destructive. If you grew up in environments where your energy was routinely taken, whether by emotionally needy parents, manipulative partners, or systems that demanded compliance, you may unconsciously gravitate toward similar dynamics in adulthood. You may confuse being needed with being loved. You may interpret your exhaustion as proof of your value. You may even feel uneasy in relationships where you're not being drained, mistaking calmness for detachment or healthy distance for abandonment. This is how the cycle perpetuates itself, not as a conscious choice, but as an unconscious repetition of a relational script written long ago. Jung described this as the compulsion to repeat, a psychological drive to recreate early relational patterns in the hope of achieving a different outcome. But without conscious awareness, these repetitions only deepen the wound. And so, without intervention, you risk spending your life surrounded by people who, in subtle or overt ways, consume your energy, leaving you perpetually tired, perpetually resentful, and perpetually disconnected from your own needs. The death of authentic expression, as you continue to give your energy away, a quieter, but perhaps more devastating consequence unfolds: the gradual death of your authentic self-expression. Because every act of unconscious self-sacrifice requires a suppression of truth. You cannot simultaneously give away your energy to meet someone else's unspoken needs and fully honor your own. One must give. And in these dynamics, it is almost always you. Over time, your authentic desires, preferences, and even your voice itself begins to fade. You become more passive, more accommodating, more silent, until one day you realize that you no longer know what you want, not because you've become more selfless, but because you've become more disconnected. This is not compassion. This is self-abandonment disguised as virtue. And the longer it persists, the harder it becomes to reclaim your voice. The existential consequences. A life half-lived at its most extreme. The consequence of allowing yourself to be drained by others is nothing less than the experience of a life half-lived. A life where your choices are dictated not by inner alignment, but by the emotional needs and projections of those around you. A life where your days are filled with interactions that leave you hollow rather than whole. A life where your deepest potential, the self that Jung believed each of us is here to realize, remains dormant, hidden beneath layers of compliance, exhaustion, and quiet despair. This is not melodrama. It is the very real outcome Jung feared when he warned about the dangers of unconscious relational entanglement. As he wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You may look at your life and feel that this is simply your fate, to be the one who gives, who cares, who carries others' burdens. But it's not fate. It's a pattern you can see, a pattern you can understand, a pattern you can break. But only if you recognize that your exhaustion is not a personal flaw, but a relational signal, a signal that something must change, not necessarily in them, but in you. Because the truth is, no one can drain your energy without your participation. And while that realization may feel daunting, it is also profoundly liberating, because it means that the power to stop the cycle, to reclaim your energy, and to live a life that is no longer governed by unconscious patterns is within your reach. So how do you do it? How do you rebel against this ancient inherited script of energetic self-sacrifice? Let's explore the radical shift in consciousness required to break free and how to reclaim your energy, your integrity, and your life. Imagine this. You wake up one morning after yet another draining encounter, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, undeniable clarity. This cannot continue. That moment is the beginning of your rebellion. But this rebellion is unlike the ones you've imagined. It's not about severing ties in fury or building walls of steel. It is subtler, more revolutionary. It is about reclaiming what you unconsciously gave away: your energy, your boundaries, and ultimately, yourself. Carl Jung would call this moment the initiation into individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, apart from the roles and projections that have defined you. Breaking free from the cycle of being drained is not about controlling others. It is about mastering the only thing you ever truly can, your own psyche. Step 1. Name the pattern. The first act of rebellion is always this: awareness. Until now, you may have assumed that your exhaustion was circumstantial, that it was about work, stress, or simply being too sensitive. But now you see it for what it is: a relational pattern. You are being drained not randomly, but systematically, in interactions where unconscious roles dominate. Roles you have played for so long that they feel like you. But they are not. They are adaptations, defenses, masks, and you cannot shed a mask until you realize you're wearing it. So ask yourself, who in my life leaves me feeling consistently depleted? What role am I playing in this relationship? What need or fear keeps me in that role? Do not rush this inquiry. Sit with it. Let the discomfort rise. Because this discomfort is the friction that makes the next step possible. Step 2. Reclaim the sacred no. For those who chronically give their energy away, no is often the most dangerous word. It feels like rejection, like abandonment, like cruelty. But in truth, it is none of these. It is a boundary, and boundaries are not walls. They are bridges to authentic connection. Without them, every relationship becomes a silent negotiation of power and energy, where resentment replaces love and obligation replaces choice. Jung understood that saying no is not about rejecting the other. It is about affirming the self. When you say no to what depletes you, you say yes to what sustains you. This is not selfishness. It is psychic hygiene. Begin practicing micro-boundaries. End conversations when you feel drained. Decline requests that feel obligatory rather than authentic. Pause before saying yes to anything, asking yourself, is this in alignment with my energy? At first, this will feel unnatural, even terrifying. Because every boundary threatens the unconscious contract that your relationships have been built upon, that you will give, and they will take. But here is the truth. Any relationship that cannot survive your boundaries was never based on love, but on utility. And you deserve more than that. Step 3. Withdraw the projection. The most profound act of liberation in Jungian psychology is withdrawing the projection, recognizing that the energy you've been giving to others often belongs to aspects of yourself that you've disowned. If you feel compelled to rescue someone, ask, what part of me feels powerless and needs rescuing? If you feel obligated to soothe someone's chaos, ask, what part of me fears chaos within? If you tolerate being drained because you fear being alone, ask, what part of me has yet to learn how to nourish my own solitude? By bringing these unconscious dynamics into the light, you no longer need to play out the pattern externally. You begin to meet your own needs internally. This is not isolation, it is integration. And as you integrate these parts, your relational dynamics will shift dramatically, because you will no longer seek from others what you have reclaimed within. Step 4. Cultivate energy sovereignty. Energy sovereignty is the radical idea that your energy belongs to you, not to your family, not to your partner, not to your friends, not to your culture, to you. And managing that energy is not a passive process. It requires conscious cultivation. Jung taught that engaging in practices that strengthen your connection to your inner self, what he called the self with a capital S, is essential for psychic health. This might include regular solitude, to discern your authentic desires; creative expression, to channel your energy into generative acts; depth practices such as dream work, active imagination, or therapy, to dialogue with your unconscious; somatic practices like yoga or meditation, to ground your energy in your body. These are not luxuries. They are lifelines, because without them, you will always be vulnerable to the unconscious pull of draining relationships. But with them, you become energetically sovereign, able to engage with others from a place of fullness rather than lack. Step 5. Accept the fallout. Not everyone will welcome your rebellion. Those who have grown accustomed to your endless giving may feel threatened by your new boundaries. They may accuse you of being cold, selfish, or distant. Let them. This is their unconscious protest against your refusal to play the role you once did. Do not mistake their discomfort for a sign that you are wrong. In fact, it may be the clearest evidence that you are finally breaking free. Because true rebellion is not about burning bridges. It is about refusing to cross ones that lead you away from yourself. The shift from sacrifice to reciprocity. As you reclaim your energy, your relationships will change. Some will fall away, unable to withstand the new dynamic. Let them. Others will transform, evolving into healthier, more reciprocal connections where giving and receiving flow naturally, without coercion or depletion. But most importantly, your relationship with yourself will be reborn. You will no longer see your exhaustion as inevitable, but as a signal. You will no longer tolerate patterns that steal your vitality. You will no longer confuse being drained with being loved. Instead, you will begin to orient your life not around obligation, but around authentic resonance. And this is the essence of individuation, living a life aligned not with the projections of others, but with the deep, often quiet truth of your own soul. But there is still one more step. Beyond the rebellion, beyond the reclamation of boundaries, there is an ultimate realization, one that changes everything you thought you knew about why you've been drained and what your relationships are truly for. Let's uncover that final, transformative insight. What if the people who have drained your energy were never your enemies, but your teachers? What if every act of exhaustion, every moment of depletion, every silent ache after giving too much was not a failure, but an invitation? Carl Jung believed that suffering is not meaningless. It is the signal of transformation. It is the soul's way of demanding your attention, forcing you to confront the parts of yourself you've neglected, abandoned, or denied. And this is the ultimate truth. You are never being drained by others. You are being called back to yourself. The exhaustion was not a punishment, but a message. A message you've been ignoring for years. A message that says you are living too far from your center, the real source of your energy. For so long, you believed that your energy was determined by circumstances, by how others treated you, by how much they asked of you, by how often they crossed your boundaries. But here is the paradigm shift Jung offers. Your true energy is not determined by what others take, but by what you refuse to own. You feel drained not because of their demands, but because you've disowned your own power. You've exiled your anger, your assertiveness, your ability to say no. You've denied your right to rest, to withdraw, to protect your boundaries. You've silenced your instincts, numbed your emotions, and severed your connection to your inner truth. And in that vacuum, others rush in. Not maliciously, not always consciously, but inevitably. Because nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human psyche. When you don't claim your space, someone else will. When you don't own your energy, someone else will absorb it. This is not about blame. It is about responsibility. And responsibility, as Jung taught, is the price of freedom. From victimhood to sovereignty. The great danger of remaining trapped in the narrative of "they drained me" is that it keeps you in a state of psychic victimhood, a state where your well-being is always dependent on how others behave, how much they take, how little they give. But when you realize that you have been an unconscious participant in this dynamic, that you have allowed, even enabled, the siphoning of your own energy, you awaken to a more powerful, more terrifying, but ultimately more liberating truth. You can stop it, not by changing them, but by changing you. By stepping out of the archetypal roles you've been playing: the martyr, the rescuer, the savior, the self-sacrificing friend. By reclaiming the parts of yourself you've projected onto others, the strength, the sovereignty, the right to protect your inner world. By recognizing that no one can train you without your consent. That is the moment you move from victim to sovereign, from exhausted to energized, from fragmented to whole. The deeper purpose of draining relationships here is the most radical insight Jung offers. The people who drain us are often those who have been unconsciously tasked with carrying the parts of ourselves we've abandoned. The needy friend reflects our own unmet needs. The demanding partner mirrors our own suppressed desires. The manipulative family member exposes our unacknowledged anger. These relationships are not random. They are archetypal encounters, designed to bring the unconscious into consciousness, to wake you up, to show you what you've refused to see. And yes, they are exhausting, but only because you've been fighting the message they carry rather than receiving it. The moment you stop resisting, the moment you turn inward and ask, what is this exhaustion trying to show me? Everything changes. The draining dynamic dissolves, not always immediately, not always cleanly, but inevitably. Because once you've integrated what the other was reflecting, you no longer need the reflection. The external drama ends because the internal split has healed. The emergence of the integrated self. And what emerges then? The integrated self. The self that no longer gives energy away in unconscious contracts of survival, but offers it freely, consciously, in alignment with truth. The self that no longer fears boundaries, but sees them as expressions of self-respect. The self that no longer confuses love with sacrifice, or kindness with self-erasure. The self that is no longer compulsively drained, but radiantly whole. This is the end point of Jung's psychology. Not the elimination of suffering, but its transformation. Not the avoidance of draining relationships, but the recognition of their role in leading you home. And once you arrive at this place, you look back on all those interactions, all those moments of exhaustion, with a new kind of reverence, not resentment, but gratitude. because they pushed you here, to the edge of yourself, to the threshold of your becoming, the final invitation. So now the question is not, why do people drain my energy? The question is, what part of me is ready to stop giving it away? Because the truth is, your energy is sacred. Your boundaries are holy. Your self is worth protecting. And every time you honor that, every time you say no, every time you choose authenticity over obligation, you become more aligned with the person you are here to be. You become the sovereign of your own energy, the author of your own life, the center of your own psyche. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That privilege is now yours to claim, not through force, not through rejection, but through quiet, unwavering self-ownership. So the next time you feel that familiar exhaustion after being with someone, pause, listen, ask, what part of me did I abandon just now? And then, with the courage Jung spent his life teaching us to cultivate, go back, pick up that part, welcome it home, because that is the true end of being drained. Not isolation, not self-protection, but integration. The moment when you finally realize, no one can take my energy. I am the one who chooses where it flows. And in that moment, you are free. If this resonates with you, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into Jungian psychology, self-discovery, and the hidden forces shaping your life. Your journey inward starts here.